My name is Unmesh, and I'm a tech lead for enterprise streaming and event technology services at Visa. My area of interest is more on product security architecture and video engineering services on enterprise level. So we usually manage like external streaming platform and internal streaming platform all over the corporate IT. And today's workshop is all about like a AV security, right? So in day-to-day summit, we usually just talk about like overall new technology that is coming. Artificial intelligence is definitely a hot topic. We talk about like a lot of new product innovation that is coming, the challenges that we usually see during the AV deployment, right? But no one usually talk about like a security on a corporate side. So there is definitely a lot of demand that is coming from the corporate IT to use the AV devices, whether it's in the broadcast space, whether it's in the video production studio, whether we are building like a cafeteria or auditorium. Just to build like an AV deployment, one of the critical challenge that we see is security in video and AV and streaming. So we also have like a guest from Ross Video. John, you want to do a quick intro?
Hi there, I'm John Naylor, VP of Product Security here at Ross Video. This is a reasonably new function within inside the CTO office. It's been going about 6 or 7 years. And our mission is really to help our product development teams make products that, once they hit your networks, behave as good citizens from a cybersecurity point of view.
Just like meeting a summit, right? And we just talk about like a new products that is coming, whether it's on-prem or cloud. So coming from the AV standpoint, we are talking about like most of the hardware, which is sitting on the public network. We talk about like a public-facing streaming, public-facing event, but now there is a lot of interest coming from the corporate IT to utilize a similar type of infrastructure on corporate IT. So one of the challenges that we see is meeting the regular traditional IT security requirement. So there is definitely a huge gap in between the AV and the cybersecurity. The cybersecurity team doesn't understand the AV world, and we also need to create awareness from the cybersecurity standpoint in our AV world, right? So there is definitely a huge gap. And from last couple of years, we usually see whenever like there are solution partners, AV vendors, whenever they deploy this type of technology on a corporate side, there is definitely a delay in terms of deployment of the project. There is a lot of BAU activity that we usually perform once we deploy the AV devices or whether it's application software on our corporate network. So this is definitely a first of the kind workshop. Most of the workshop people are bringing the solutions. So I'm bringing the problem here. So we are going to talk about the problem, and by end of the workshop, we will at least like, maybe my message is just to give, create an awareness of the cybersecurity in our space, and hopefully encourage all of the AV partners and vendor just to create more robust security control on their environment. And at the same time, we are also going to fight back with our corporate IT side, how they can understand our world, right? So coming from the security standpoint, the one additional security control is not enough. So if I'm a cybersecurity engineer, I just want more and more control each and every layer, whether it's a physical control, whether it's access control, whether it's identity and access management, whether it's a network security control. So I'm not satisfied with 1 or 2 control. I want more control. The more control that we are putting in our systems definitely is going to create a chaos in the video, because we care about the quality, we care about the latency, we care about the media delivery, right? So in a traditional corporate IT side, most of the company, they usually define the term that any kind of like a packet that is going from our network to outside. We care about the encryption, we monitor every single packet, right? So in terms of email world, if I send any email to you guys, if you get an email within 5 minutes, no one really understands the importance of the email. But if you're watching any kind of like a live broadcast, and if someone is basically doing any kind of like a packet filtering, or they are scanning each and every video packet, that creates a buffering on the end user side. So end user is basically just blaming the streaming platform, but between the end user laptop or end user node and between the source and the camera, there are like 50 different devices that's sitting on our corporate IT side and also from the external side that no one's talk about, right? So the expectation from corporate IT is to meet the cybersecurity requirement, but from the AV side, we are focusing more on on-prem devices, right? So these devices are not just using a Windows operating system or Linux operating system where we can just basically patch on a regular basis. There is a patch coming from Windows side every month. It's not fair for us and from the product team to release the patch every single month. We definitely need to create some kind of like a SSDLC environment, lifecycle environment, right, where we are going to focus on our pen testing. So this particular workshop is just to create awareness. We will again like share some kind of like a common practices that we usually consider in a cybersecurity, some of the challenges that we see from the cybersecurity attack point of view. And at the end, we are also going to see how we can basically create a strategy where we can at least like follow some common practices, and then we can basically come up with some kind of like a solution. Are you guys okay with that? Okay, sure, perfect. The data breaches can be happen for multiple reasons, but one of the common point from the data breach is unauthorized access. So data breach, unauthorized access, and the compliance, they are basically connecting to each other. So coming from the data breach standpoint, if I'm focusing more on like a hardware standpoint, I'm going to create some kind of like a custom OS if I'm going to use a Windows or Linux OS, but most of the AV vendor, they usually use those OS, they customize the OS just to make their product better. So during the part of that customization, no one care about the security, or even though they do care about the security, there are a lot of security controls that needs to be in place in terms of meeting the security requirement. So that is like one of the challenge in terms of data breaches. And the second challenge that we can see is about network vulnerability as well, right? So on unauthorized access, we are talking about like identity and access management control, right? We usually have like 10 different types of product from the same company, but there are no RBAC control that is in place, role-based access control we are talking about. So whenever like any kind of like a product company sell the product to the AV vendors where they can deploy on our corporate side, no one care about creating an account for admin, right? So we are talking about like 10 different deployment engineer. That means the default account, that is the biggest problem, right? So during the deployment is not like a day one job or day two job. It's a process. It's like takes 3 months or 6 months during the deployment process. Another problem that we see also on unauthorized access is separate network, because that's the big one. No one talk about like putting all sort of like a hardware on enterprise network. So the common practice that in our AV world we are usually seeing it, creating our own air gap network, deploying all sort of hardware on air gap network. That's what we call about air gap. But we still need to send the data from our on-prem network to the outside. So there is still definitely some kind of like a gateway that we are talking about, and that might create the network bridging between the corporate side and AV side. So that's the problem that we are also seeing from the cybersecurity standpoint. And the third, the most common problem from the cybersecurity standpoint is the compliance and challenges. Whether all of the products are ISO standard, or whether all of the products and the companies are following the SOC 2 reports. The penetration testing is basically like a very common, in other term we usually call this ethical hacking. So every single company, they usually perform the pen test every year. That's the cycle that they usually follow. But some company usually release their pen test in January 2024, for an example. And they release the major upgrade in April. So now the company is basically following like, okay, I need to do another pen test in next year, 2025. So now we are waiting for 6 months. So there is a high chance that the new product or the new firmware that they release, there are still an open security vulnerability. That will definitely expose some kind of like a cyber attack. So these are the challenges that we see in today's activity. But from the product standpoint, we can also like get some kind of like opinion from John as well, how to mitigate this type of risk whenever we are building the new product or we are releasing the new firmware. John, any insight on that?
Yeah, let me just pick up on the whole topic of this being about AV audiovisual products, and think about how these systems are quite different to the IT systems that the normal sort of stock in trade of the cybersecurity teams inside these organizations. I've got a few bullets. Useful life. AV systems normally have like a 7-year depreciation. Contrast that with about 2 years for IT servers and switches and such like. That's a big difference, and that means that they're generally older than the IT stuff, and they could have been designed at a time when security wasn't a thing. Also, AV systems are definitely designed to hit a price point, and that results in all they're designed to meet other functional requirements like they have to have a certain low weight or a low power consumption. Think about a camcorder. If a camcorder gets too heavy, then you start getting workers complaints when people put their shoulders out using them, and the heat becomes unbearable. So that's why we use a lot of embedded systems and systems that are tuned to be just powerful enough to do the AV job at hand, which often means that they can't do the other AV, antivirus, because they weren't designed to support endpoint protection. So they do tend to run web interfaces nowadays, and that makes them vulnerable to the credentials attack that Unmesh was talking about. And some of them, this will frighten people, they even have tech support or maintenance accounts installed that are secret. The manufacturer doesn't tell the customers about them. They all have high privileges. They all have the same account username and password. And they basically are the very attractive toehold for attackers. So those are just a few of the challenges around AV. What makes them different from a perspective, different from IT systems, and how the approach, you do need a careful approach to integrate them securely into your operations.
Yeah. No, thank you, John. Another question to you, John, is what are your thoughts on separate network? Like we are talking about like creating like a air gap network and also like dealing with that network equipment with our traditional corporate IT network, right? Even though we are calling them as an air gap, technically it's not an air gap, right? We are talking about it's just like an adjacent network. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, most AV systems, excluding my old Blu-ray player, most of these AV products nowadays have got an Ethernet port, so that makes them part of the Internet of Things. And I've got a nice saying there, like, the letter S in IoT stands for security. Really, you have to look at IoT devices, which includes AV devices, very, very carefully. And the advice often given by manufacturers and vendors who haven't thought about it too much is air gap. We all know that air gaps like VXLANs and so forth, enclaves, they can be made to work, but you're only one configuration error away from the air gap disappearing, and now you've got all of these non-ideal products on your network that is no longer air gapped. A few years ago, I had a panel of industry experts from companies like Fox. Olsen from the SVG was also part of that panel. And one of the key takeaways, this is them giving a presentation to Ross Video product management and senior management staff, about 70 of us. And at the end of this session, the question was, what's the one takeaway you have for us? And they was very loud and clear and unified in saying, there is no air gap that you can rely on, but you can't rely on that. So I'm sorry to sort of disappoint that on the one hand I've said we've got all these problematic or potential problems in products, in this class of products, and an air gap is one way to address it, but you've got to be really careful. So if you look at some of the NIST publications on Zero Trust, they do actually anticipate that, in that there is a recognized Zero Trust architecture that has legacy equipment inside of a secure enclave, and then a policy enforcement point as a gateway into the enclave. So the idea is out there, and it's just a matter of making it work and having the discipline of a change control process, so that when the configurations are being changed and how they're being changed, and that they're not being changed by people accidentally.
Yeah, no, agree with you, John. So even like from the network separation standpoint, we are talking about like there are a couple of pros and cons as well, right? Pros is definitely low risk, because we are not dealing with like a traditional IT asking the proxy team, asking like a firewall team to allow our devices on their network. So definitely we are talking about like less deployment time. So that means like we can definitely wrap up the project faster. But at the same time, there are definitely a lot of risk as well, right? Putting this type of devices on an AV network. So we can talk about like whether it's a short-term goal or long-term goal in terms of meeting the security requirement. But one of the challenges that we see on a corporate side is the expectation from the management is integrate all of the devices together, how we can basically manage these devices from the corporate side. That is the big one. So it's very difficult to integrate the AV system coming from the air gap side and how we can connect these devices on a corporate end. So that is like the one of the big challenge. The second challenge that we also see is unauthorized access. So we can mitigate that gap by introducing the RBAC control, whether it's coming from the Active Directory. So there is another problem. If you are putting this type of hardware or hybrid solutions on an air gap network, not having internet connectivity we are talking about, because even though it's air gap, we are talking about internet connectivity, then we are again like putting some kind of like a firewall and having additional security control, right? So how we can basically leverage the Active Directory control, pushing a policy from the front end, so that basically whether we have a 10 different admins, some admins require some kind of like a network access, some admins require some kind of like a system access, right? So giving the admin permission to each and everyone, I don't think it's a standard practice, right? We have to ask a question, why that person need a permission, right? If there are like 100 checkbox and we are talking about like, okay, that person just need a network permission, we need to create a rollback access control on our system, on our AD side. So maybe we can push that policy. So putting this type of hardware on air gap side, we are also losing that visibility. The cost is another factor, but it's definitely an individual decision whether we are going to manage the two different network, how we are going to manage that network, right? Introducing again vulnerable product on AV side. We are talking about like air gap network and a corporate network, even though in a cybersecurity term, we call this adjacent network. So one error, and then basically we are literally like allowing someone to gain access of the corporate system just by using the air gap network as well. So to mitigate that gap, there are a couple of common practices that we can always do, right? So whenever you deploy this type of product on your environment, there's always a security architecture that comes into the picture. So security architecture is definitely end-to-end practice, right? Whether how is my solution is doing, whether that solution is an on-prem solution or a cloud solution, how many times we are going to get a firmware upgrade, which type of OS that device is going to use. That is coming from the security architecture. Now we are talking about like IAM side, identity and access management. So we are not only talking about like a RBAC control, how the user is getting the unauthorized access. Do we really need to basically create the accounts to all of the user? Can we set some kind of like a permission to the specific user? Can we send some kind of like a expiration policy? Can we create like some strong policy on the OS side where some common password cannot accept, even though it's a hardware? So maybe we can run some kind of like a script as well. There will be a code review lane that needs to be done, but that is coming from the product side. If you are buying the AV product, then the code review is something that will be done from the product side. Another one is the pen test I'm talking about, the ethical hacking, right? So as a standard practice, even though companies are doing like every year pen tests, but sometimes we see like the pen test is done so poorly that we cannot accept that type of pen test performed by the AV vendor. So why is that, right? There are some kind of like a standard. We are talking about like OOPS top 10, which is like an open web application security project. So most of the company, they usually follow those type of protocol. Every 3 to 4 years, they usually release like what are the top 10 security challenges, right? So the top challenge right now in OOPS 10 is broken access control. And we also see in today's world that unauthorized access, I'm repeating again and again, because that is very common problem in the AV industry, right? So how we can basically close the gap of the unauthorized and broken access control. That is the one thing. The another one from the pen test standpoint, most of the AV vendor, they follow the CVSS methodology. It's a 3.0 or 3.1, but some of the AV product, they are not aware of that. So if vendor is performing this type of pen test on their side, then that means we are considering a less deployment time. If the product is already secure, if the pen test is already done on the vendor side, we are not going to do any kind of like a security review on our corporate side. We are literally buying the product, deploying on that. We can define the security architecture and deploy those type of devices on our network as well. So that will definitely give some kind of like a flexibility as well in terms of like deploying this type of hardware on our side. From the RBAC standpoint, John, a question to you. What are your thoughts of, even though we are putting all of the on-prem devices, if there's an X company and they're having 10 different products, right? Even though it's very difficult from the AV side to deploy the RBAC policy on each and every hardware, whether it's just a recorder or just a mic or some kind of like an intelligent OS we are talking about. So what are your thoughts in terms of like defining the RBAC on just a dedicated server, creating an ecosystem of the similar product line?
I think that our back is a long way away. I think that's given the current state of maturity of the kinds of AV products that you can buy, even getting something simpler than RBAC as non-default passwords onto products would be a good move. Just as I went to a really interesting presentation in September last year. It was an organization called Security for Media. And it's interesting. This is the first CNA or CVE numbering authority dedicated to media, and they are actually going to start doing penetration testing. And they, at their launch, they did something quite naughty, because I don't think they had permission for these breaches that they demonstrated. But there were about 4 broadcasters who they managed to get into. And it was a matter of the thing they had in common. I won't name them, but the thing they had in common is that the products being used were misconfigured so that their control interfaces were public facing. And the second thing they had in common is that they hadn't changed the default passwords. So that by noticing that there was these products available from public internet, and reading the user manual for that product, which is available online, and finding out what the default password was, an attacker could just basically take over the show. And that happened 4 times. 4 different instances were presented in September. So we're a long way from back when a lot of products have default passwords. There's some legislation in California, actually. I'm kind of in California now, just up the road in Sacramento. I think it's in 2020, there's a state law passed that requires all IoT devices to either have a unique default password, and think of the Wi-Fi router or the cable modem you've got at your house. It's got a password printed on it that's unique. The technologies to do this and the processes in place to do this are there. And basically, there are baby monitors all over California that have the same password and can be used to form a botnet or create DDoSes. That's the kind of thing that I think the California legislature is really targeting. But looking from to this audience and the corporations and expectations about identity and access management, RBAC's a long way away. The vendors are not sophisticated enough to support RBAC, but non-default list switch shouldn't be weak, and that's probably the path to go to with them now, rather than say you have to do full up RBAC.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Dan. So one of the challenges that we also see from the audit standpoint, right? So we talk about like the deployment of the product. Then once the project is finished, we are talking about like maintaining the BAU activity, right? Whether we kind of like have some kind of like a vulnerability that we are talking about, right? So we fix that. So during the same journey, one of the challenges that we suffer is audit, right? Because there are a lot of security control that we have to put in place, and legal and compliance, that is something that they see in a different way. So another way that we can connect the RBAC on unauthorized access with the audit trail is the logs, right? So we see like in some of the devices, there are logs options that is available. But in most of the AV product, we really don't know who log into the platform, right? So even like if there is some kind of like a damage is already done, and then how we can recover the data, that is number one. But number two is just to investigate what exactly happened, who intercepted that traffic, right? Or who basically initiated that type of attack. So having some kind of like a audit trail coming from the audit standpoint, I think it's equally important. Any thoughts, John?
Again, every product is going to be different. It's rare to find an AV product that would integrate into Splunk or any of the sort of logging, today's modern logging infrastructure. It's rare that you'd find them having a syslog output. It's fairly rare that they even have SNMP. So unfortunately, it's a case by case. A lot of sort of difficult to scale work to actually access logs. They tend not to be standardized, unfortunately.
Okay, no, perfect. I know we have only like 2 minutes over, but my question to the audience, right, is definitely we are bringing some kind of like a problem here, right? So the message to the audience, at least from my side, right, how we can basically create some kind of like a cybersecurity awareness to the AV world, how we can identify the risk, and how we are going to create a solutions where we can meet some kind of like a cybersecurity requirement from the corporate IT, but at the same time, how we can keep AV people happy as well. Go ahead, you have a question.
So my question is what is it going to take for AV companies to start to take cybersecurity seriously, right? Is you have the GDPR, which will actually fine corporations if they do have data breaches. Will it take something like that extreme to make AV companies start to take cybersecurity seriously? And then just my follow-up question to that is, who is accountable? So like, if we're forced to put AV equipment on that doesn't meet cybersecurity standards and there's a data breach, and then that AV company is not willing to abide by any cybersecurity protocols, who is accountable?
John, you want to answer the first question? I will answer the second one.
Let me field the first one. I really see we've got two types of customers at Ross Video. Those for whom getting a signal to air is mission critical, and those who are in this room here who getting a signal to air routes, bad if it doesn't happen, but it's not mission critical. And those type of organizations, your social media giants, the universities, hospitals, they regard their IT infrastructure as being mission critical. Not having bad guys inside their networks is mission critical. And so they'll push back hard, and they do push back hard on companies like Ross. And the other thing that's part of the answer is that we started off as a broadcast company 50 years ago. About 10, 15 years ago, we made a strategic decision we need to diversify into different verticals. And now less than half of our revenues come from the broadcast vertical. And the one that we're really trying to grow and we're succeeding at is corporate vertical. So the real sort of answer to that question is market signals will get you a long way. We have picked up the market signals, so cyber's the thing that we need to up our game because of where we're coming from, because of the nature of the products that we've made, the age of the technology that's used, and the anything goes as long as you can get a signal there kind of ethos that we've grown. But now we need to go and make revenues in other verticals that have quite different needs from a security perspective, and we're listening.
Okay. I think due to the time limitation, I will wrap up the follow-up question pretty quick. I think the accountability is coming from both the side, coming from the implementer or someone who is again dealing with the corporate IT, and at the same time AV vendors as well, right? So sometimes corporate IT is pushing a policy. I don't think that is applicable to the AV industry at all. So I think there is definitely a big gap, and hopefully this workshop will at least give some kind of like answer to the corporate IT people and also the AV people. Taking AV, like cybersecurity taking seriously from AV standpoint, but at the same time, how AV works. So corporate IT also understand how video works, how the engineering works, how the video engineering works. So I think like both the parties basically equally accountable for this particular one. But yeah, thank you so much again, guys. Thank you. Yeah.